to learn a lot. And just to let you know, it's not just, do you need help? No. Okay. It's not just being in this room. We are having our own students live streaming. And our own student, Kahiro, taking photos. So clap for Kahiro. Yeah. So thank you so much. And just for that introduction, I'm looking forward to hearing what you say and what you learn as we move on forward. So I'd like to welcome the Dean, that is Dr. Geoffrey Serede of the School of Communication, Cinematics and Creative Arts to say something officially. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Alan, for honoring this invitation by our Grand Elder, Prof. Isaiah Cherotich. Now, how many of my Mark 6030 students are here? Wow, that's a good number. We are running into something this week actually. We are looking at Habermas Public Sphere. And Habermas Public Sphere in the perspective of a converged media landscape. There's a lot happening. There's quite a lot happening. And the happenings that actually we are seeing in the media landscape are in step with what the Media and Communications Department and the School of Communication is trying to do. We are going the direction of multimedia journalism. Over and above going the direction of multimedia journalism, we are also going the direction of strategic digital communication. So we are trying to fit you in pockets that actually are worth it. That you're not just really doing everything and nothing. That if you graduate with a degree from their department, you'll actually gladly go out there and say that it was worth every coin and every effort. Today is not my day. It's Alan's day. And we are glad that actually he remembered his alma mater. And we are hoping, really, really crossing our fingers that the value that he impacts to you guys is something that actually you will be able to write about. My project class, I always tell them, because they're working on their terminal projects, senior projects, that what actually you're going to conceptualize and actually deliver by week 14 will thrust you into industry. That if you just do your own things for the grade, you'll get the credit. But when you go out there, no one wants to see the credit. They want to see your portfolio. And we are hoping that Alan will speak to that. So welcome, Alan, and I'll pass it on to the chair, to Prof. Cherotich.
Thank you, thank you. Yes, it is John-Allan Namu's day. It's not mine. I'll take a few minutes just to introduce to you John-Allan Namu before he takes the stage. In my opinion, this is a celebration, a homecoming of sorts, John. Since he graduated, by the way, he's a class of 2006. Yes, and he is among the few or the many alumni who are flying high the USIU flag. We're very proud. It's a privilege to have him here. And the story began sometime 2005, I think, or 2004, when I invited a journalist, editor to talk to my class, just as today's session. After about 1 hour, 30 minutes of the presentation and question and answer session, this editor left, and then he called me in the evening and says, there was one young man there who asked several questions. Can you give me his name? I said, can you describe? And then I got the point. He told me, please request him to come to my office on Monday. I think that was a Thursday. And I passed the message to John, and the rest is history. That's why we're here. The truth of the matter is, even today, it may be the beginning of someone's career into investigative journalism, development journalism, and the various media, would I say, disciplines available. So it is certainly a great evening to have John here. Let me mention, for the benefit of those who think USIU School of Communication does not have equipment. John-Allan Namu was among the few who started in this institution when we didn't have equipment. We didn't have equipment. He will confirm. Those days, we outsourced. We used to travel to Andrew Crawford Productions along State House Road. And that is where they did their work. Together with a group, Tony Kashukia, there was Cynthia Nyamai, Fred Waga. Can you imagine people who did not get access to equipment and they have transformed communication? What about you, who have access to TV studio, radio station, and hundreds of pieces of equipment? It is your opportunity. So, John, let me just say one or two things. That while you are away, in the Kenyan political language, while you are away, the journalism program has grown in leaps and bounds to a school. It's now the School of Communication, Cinematics, and Creative Arts. We have quite a number of programs. We have expanded, we've grown, and we have a master's program as well. And soon we are thinking of a PhD program. So, in your absence, when you are doing big things out there, we've also walked the talk. Kindly engage this group of students, encourage them, motivate them in the best way you know possible. Welcome.
Thank you, Professor Cher. of the work between ourselves, which is Africa Uncensored, and a partner organization of ours, a very good friend of mine called Kevin Odanga, called Odipodev. It's a data and insights company. We do a lot of collaborations together. And the reason that I thought I'd give this is because it kind of talks about the arc that the Dean was talking about, that, you know, that journalism is changing, right? And it's changing very, very quickly. But not only is journalism changing, but the world is changing, right? So you perhaps are one of the most fortunate cohorts of students in journalism school that there genuinely is a need for in the market today because of the changing world, right? So this is a question that I usually ask to early career journalists and journalists at the beginning of any class. How many of you have seen, and I'll iterate a little bit, how many of you have seen breaking news that was broken by a media company recently, right? Anybody? Or should I refine the question? All right. I'll just ask it again in the same way. How many of you have seen an item of breaking news that was broken by the media organization itself, i.e., they did the story, they broke the news, and it became national news that hadn't appeared anywhere before that? Anyone? Not in a couple of years, right? Well, neither have I. The last story that I broke, in a sense, was the Dusit terrorist attack. And I just happened to be on my way back from an assignment. That's how I broke it, right? Otherwise, it would have been broken much, much earlier, or much, much sooner on your mobile phones, on TikTok, on X, on Instagram, what have you, right? So if this thing that we were so obsessed with, breaking news, being the first, getting the scoop, etc., is no longer as valuable as it used to be, right? So when we were coming up, breaking the story, we'd sit down and watch NTV's news bulletin to see whether they had scooped us, and they used to do the same, right? And we'd always celebrate whenever we got like a breaking news story. But then the internet came, right? And those became fewer and fewer and fewer until today. That banner breaking news, in my view, is a lie, right? Because you will have seen, in some way, shape, or form, a news item, that has been broken by someone on the ground, someone by, even by the newsmakers themselves. Donald Trump being an example, right? You will have seen this before you get in front of a television or in front of your feed for a journalist to be able to break it all down, right? And then say breaking news. So then, in an era where breaking news no longer holds the intrinsic value that it once did, what is the job of a journalist? That's a question I'm asking you. Does anyone have an answer? Don't worry, I'm not grading this, so you can, yes, go ahead.
I think there's something. I'm Andrita Kiriamiti. I'm a journalism student, my senior year. I think in Professor Fred Waga's class, we had learned something called the 2-day story or something. Yeah. So where you're going more in depth and asking questions that were not covered in that short frame of the news. So yeah, you go very in depth where you're looking at who are the concerned parties, who's affected by this, are there any biases in the stories, who's to gain from this, who's to lose. So you just go deeper and offer more information that might not have been found in a short news item.
Fantastic. Would you like to, yeah.
Hi, I'm Leslie Kashando. I would say journalists also become fact checkers in a way that they will have to go deeper and give to the public more information, like she said, and also making sure that the fake information that is out there is verified and they come back with the truth to ensure that the overconsumption of news does not become misinformation, but instead is truthful and people are not misled by propagandas and things like that.
Anyone else? Anyone else? Any men want to give it a shot? Right? Okay.
My name is John Kennedy, and like Leslie and Andrita have said, it is to contextualize and bring out the facts that might have been missed.
Thank you, Kennedy. Context, right? So, in an age where breaking news doesn't matter anymore, right? The reason that journalists exist, one of the major reasons that journalists exist, is to provide context, right? Context is incredibly important. Leslie talked about fake news and disinformation. You talked about, who the parties are, etc., right? And you encapsulated everything for us very nicely. Why is context important? Because in an era of a polluted information ecosystem, right? If you look at your TikTok feeds, you'll know what I'm talking about, right? In an era of a polluted, information system, right, or ecosystem, we need clarity. We need someone to mediate, right? And journalism is, by and large, the only profession that does this on a regular basis for the public good. Now, we can argue about the ownership of media houses, bias within the newsroom, etc. But as per our raison d'etre, we are supposed to be the people who mediate on behalf of the public. What's true? What's false? Why is this happening? Why, in fact, is one of the most important questions that you will ask as a journalist. Why? Right? And if you transpose that to investigative journalism, which is where I sort of cut my teeth, the definition by and large of investigative journalism is revealing hidden information, which is hidden either deliberately or behind a mass of information that makes it difficult to see, right? Information that helps advance the public's understanding. Usually, with investigative journalism, it's on wrongdoing, right? But you use open source data, you use confidential sources, and various other means and tools to be able to prove your story. That's investigative journalism. So, in my view, investigative journalism was kind of ahead of the curve in terms of providing context, where other forms and formats of journalism was more about providing information and insight that was very perishable, right? And this is what I like to encourage most journalists to think about. You might not become an investigative journalist. You might not even like investigative journalism, but have the investigative mindset, right? Ask why. I keep saying ask why because why is the most important question. Why gets you deeper? Why gets you further? Why gets you the people who are interested or affected by an issue? Why helps you understand systems, not just stories, right? Systems, not just stories. A story will be here today, and your news feed, once you refresh, it's gone. Have you ever clicked on something on your news feed, and it's like a really interesting thing, and then it refreshes, and you can't find it for like 3 hours. You're just there doom scrolling, wondering what's going on. That's kind of like a microcosm of how the news cycle is. It's at hyper speed, right? And if we don't invest in ourselves, in having that investigative mindset, what then happens when AI, as an example, becomes artificial general intelligence, where the AI itself is thinking, creating, things that have no human input? How do we then start to fact check that? How do we start to interrogate in an era where a machine has been built to simulate human thought, human problem solving, right? There still is importance in our profession. I believe that. And I think you guys are the ones who are going to face this question a lot more than I. Me niko njia ya kuenda retire. You look at my kids, I'll be coming here to pay fees, hopefully, very soon. Pass your exams, all right? All right? Anyway, so I thought I'd start with that, just to give some foundation of why it is that I'm speaking to you about this. Now, this presentation might not be surprising to many of you. Could everybody here who is below the age of 25 put up your hands, please? Yo, hey. Where my knees have lost a bit of flexibility just by seeing those hands raised. So meaning that when I was in USIU, you guys, your parents were still talking stage. My gosh. Hey, mimi mzee. All right. So, so last year we had a very seismic event or series of events in Kenya that reverberated across the world, right? We had a series of protests that in many markets popularized the phrase Gen Z. So Gen Z had always existed, yes, and it was, you know, the terminology to, you know, describe people who are born between the ages of Muna. Gen Zs are born, when are the first Gen Zs born? 20? 97. And the last Gen Z is 20? 2012. All right. So I keep telling you guys that your small brothers are not Gen Zs, they're Gen Alphas. Anyway, we have this debate. But the Kenyan protests were crucial in that. And I don't think people recognize just how important of a news source this country is, not just for the continent, but for the globe, right? You think back to the Trump election, Trump won, right? And some of the methods in disinformation that were used via Cambridge Analytica, they were first attempted where? Here, right? Where are social media platforms, AI platforms, training their machines to be able to recognize bits of content, fake news, etc., and training the algorithms? Here, right? We can talk about how, you know, that labor is exploitative, etc., but the point is there is something about this country, and I wouldn't get too much into that, that's really important and influential in how some of these things took place. And one of these things happened to be the protests, right? Now, as a journalist, or as journalists, many of us were taken by surprise because the protest came from the most unlikely thing. Budget season typically is boring, right? It is the time when the business journalists have their moment to shine. And it's usually like a week or 2 weeks, and that's it. And then they go back into their corners and produce business news and read all sorts of things, right? But this year, or last year, it wasn't just about facts, figures, numbers, budgets, statements, etc. There was something that shifted completely. The protests, as I'm sure some of you might have taken part. How many of you took part in the protests? Someone has raised 2 hands. Yeah. They were fundamental because they were talking, they transcended budgets, budgetary analysis, policy statements, the appropriations bill, and what have you. They transcended all of that, right? But they also did something. They indicated like there was a bit of a change that had been happening for some time. And this is what this presentation is about. Hopefully, I'm kind of right. Hopefully, this is interesting to you. If not, then you'll have spent 1.5 hours with a guy who has 2 kids, and that's it. All right. So let's go. So the objective here was to explain what the lessons were for journalists, right? Because this was an important time for us. This was the first time in a long time where a public news event was being covered, at least in Kenya, with such furore and like interest outside of the media fraternity as well as inside. And so there were lessons that needed to be learned. So I'll want you to pay attention to these cards over here. The numbers are slightly dated because I did this presentation in November, right? So the numbers will have changed, but the lessons are similar. So typically, this is how legacy and formal news media reported our protests. Hopefully no advertisements. All right.
For the last week, the world has been watching Nairobi. Here's what they saw.
Young Kenyans are demonstrating for their rights. They're demonstrating with flags and banners. I can't even see anymore. They're being tear gassed. They're being tear gassed.
That woman struggling to speak because her lungs and throat are on fire. Her name is Alma Obama. She's a Kenyan activist. And yes, Barack Obama's past history. Protesters and police have been at each other's throats, and there has been incredible violence. Humanitarian groups say police fired live rounds. They also say more than a dozen people at least were killed, many more hurt. The military was deployed, and protesters were furious.
Police opening fire on demonstrators trying to storm Parliament.
This seething anger stemmed from a government attempt to raise taxes on lots of things, from cars to sanitary pads, smartphones, and staples like sugar, vegetable oil, bread. But this wasn't just about money. It wasn't even really about politics. It was about desperation, about a people who felt beaten down again and again. They told their government, told the world that they'd had enough, and today, the government listened.
Let's stop there. So we know the rest of the story there. All right? Hey, that was like, yeah, let's just move on. Rais ni rais, tumheshimu rais ama? Hey, I'll be stoned here. So, the moral of the story is that there's a very formal and structured way of storytelling that we've become used to. And I thought that was one of his guys coming to tell me, yes, thank you for defending. That we've gotten used to, right, in terms of the way we tell our stories. But something else was happening during the protests, right? This was international news, as I had mentioned. Every major network covered the protests, and not just covered them one day as a highlight, etc. They had substantive coverage, setting camp here, trying to find the reasons for the violence, etc. It was a major news event because after it, there were protests in Bangladesh. Then there were protests in Mozambique. Then this was happening amid Frexit, which was happening in Mali, Guinea, Burkina Faso, etc. It was signaling something, right? But for us, it was signaling something else. There were other voices that were shaping this. I don't know whether you guys know this guy.
I never met a corrupt politician until you met an African corrupt politician. Meet William Ruto. William Ruto had a problem. See, he gets elected as the president of Kenya. People go, yeah. He go, yeah, I'm finna raise taxes. People go, what you say? They said, what did you just say, bro? I can't afford my house. The cost of living is so high. He go, nah, y'all not understand. If I'll raise your taxes, the country's finna be richer. So it's gonna come down to this. It come down to us. He said, come down to y'all. So y'all. It didn't go back to them. In fact, their cost of living just kept going up. He said, not TikTok, you not listen. Tell them what else I said.
Lesson one in our profession, and I think this would be important for you as you go into the profession, is listen to who is talking and who they're listening to, right? CBC has cultivated its audience the same way Citizen has, the same way KTN has, the same way even Africa Uncensored has, right? But Chevy, right, a TikToker, who talks mostly about hip-hop beef and all sorts of things, has a completely, almost different audience. People come to him for various reasons. But fundamentally, it's about the insight that he gives in the story, right? Everything, see, this guy had a problem, and that's his catchphrase, and then he goes into it. He's one of my favorite TikTokers, to be honest. But did you not notice that the CBC at the time, their viewership of the analysis of the Gen Z protests was just under 1 million. Chevy's was at 5.9 million on TikTok, right? So what does that mean? It means that there is a competition and a tension between people who are studied in the practice of journalism and people who are experienced or very talented in storytelling and have now become interlocutors that are sort of like taking away the attention of audiences that, typically we used to rely on, right? But that's the interesting thing about this time, about the Gen Z protests. the influence wasn't just coming from the formal or legacy media. In fact, I think there was a repudiation of the legacy media at the time. And there were other voices that were influencing that. If you think that was happening globally, it's not true. Now, this one was interesting, right? So with our partners Odipodev, they were looking into news and analysis trends over that period of time. This is January. No, this is not January. This is like March, going into May. So now we're going into budget week. Down here, this is Citizen, Nation, Standard, and up here is who? Nairobi Gossip Club, right? So, this is usually the gap between them, by the way, just on a regular news day. Why? Because we like to say, we are very focused individuals. We do news and analysis, business daily peke yake, sindio? But what are we really reading, right? Okay, I don't know if BNN is still like a big like gossip blog and what have you. There's in journalism circles, there's Maverick Aoko. There's all sorts of people who sort of like are part of this, right? But they followed Nairobi Gossip Club. Now look what happens the closer they get to June, right? So there are a couple of dips in coverage, right? But look at how it shoots up and continues to shoot up. Yes, the protests were a huge news event. So everybody had like a bump in coverage, but look at the gap. And this is online, right? This is typically just on Facebook and, and on other Meta products, right? But look at that. There's like 2.5 million people, right, who are tuned in. Over 3 million. Going towards 4 million. These guys didn't even breach 1 million, right? So if gossip was driving content around the Gen Z protests, what does it mean about Nairobi Gossip Club? Not so much that we get all of our news from Nairobi Gossip Club, but it was pulling audiences that typically aren't interested in news into the political sphere, right? And their storytelling, as well as their audience and their habits, then lent itself to this moment, right? They don't perceive the content as news because, when you're going to Nairobi Gossip Club, ni chai, sindio, it's tea. That's what you're looking for. But if tea is presented as, your sanitary pads are going to be taxed, can you imagine, right? There was a lot of disinformation in Nairobi Gossip Club, and various other gossip sites about the finance bill, but the die had already been cast. Now, we were talking about Nairobi Gossip Club as quote-unquote a media company, right? Look at what our influencers were doing. Now, this is interesting because now an influencer with their individual audiences, right? So we looked at, or rather Odipodev looked at Murugi Munyi, Khalif Cairo, prior to the, and Eric Omondi, right? And then we compared with Citizen, right? So Citizen's up there at 2.5 million. This is prior to the protests, right? Coverage is falling, falling, falling. I don't know why. I don't have those answers. But this coverage seems to start rising, at least, for Khalif Cairo and a little bit for Murugi Munyi and Eric Omondi, right? That was a shift in influence, right? A shift in influence that told us that journalism is no longer shaping how people think about the things that they're thinking about, right? Because none of the media tells you what to watch or what to read, right? But they kind of tell you what to think about it. They shape public opinion, right? And what was Eric Omondi saying at the time? What was Khalif Cairo saying at the time, right? If you remember, it was very, very pro the protests, right? So did Murugi Munyi. And so I had a chance to talk to her. This is what she said.
June was an extremely important, impactful, and interesting month, I would say, for me personally, as Murugi, for Kenyans at large, and I guess specifically for content creators, and I'm speaking as a content creator. It was a season where everything that we knew about how to engage on our online space was very different. It was difficult to do any kind of like paid or sponsored work. But during that season, it just felt like the most important thing to do was, one, use our platforms to be able to disseminate as much information as possible, verified information, of course, and bought an AI sort of like platform that has been created where you can get up-to-date information about the finance bill, about protests, about what was happening in the country at the time. And thankfully for me, I also have quite a few lawyers in my family, and I have a few lawyer friends, so that's where I was getting the information that I was being able to disseminate online, as well as on X, obviously, you know, and being able to share information that especially the leaders of the protests were sharing. For me, it was really important to take part in the protests, both online but also physically, in terms of going out on the streets. One, as an example to my children, because they were watching our everyday news. They knew what was happening, they knew Mandamano, they knew what was going on in the country. They didn't obviously know everything about the finance bill, but they could tell Kenyans are unhappy with X. They are going out onto the streets to fight for their rights to be unhappy about in X. So I really wanted to set an example that this is what we do as Kenyans, as women, as content creators, as a mom who cares about my kids' future. It's important for me that they see me in that light and in that space. I also really felt that there were things specifically in the finance bill that I felt very personally about, especially anything touching on women's rights, women's access to things like pads and tampons, and it just really felt like if the people who are meant to take care of us are not showing us that they are concerned about our livelihoods, then we need to take that into our hands. And I felt so proud and so, I felt really proud to have been able to be part of it in a really meaningful way. It sucks that I was arrested and had a really horrible experience with the police, but I'm glad that we all went out there and got the result that we wanted. Yeah.
Okay, so storytelling, right? This, I think, is the edge that a lot of these influencers have had on us. It's storytelling. It's interesting. You know, you watch stuff and you're like, wow, okay, this is such an interesting, like I saw Gil Scott-Heron's, you know, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised, like a version of that speaking directly to the protests. And it was really well edited. It was like fantastic, just at the beginning of the protests, right? And the storytelling was in contest with traditional formal means of storytelling, right? This means that journalism as a profession who is focused on a specific, you know, manner of storytelling is now a contested space. And I'm sure this isn't a surprise to you, right? But when you look at it from the context of a protest, you see that these are the sorts of things that then become important, right? Here are some questions you want to ask yourself. Is your storytelling accessible, right? When you sit behind a desk and you're reading on a teleprompter and you're presenting news in a very formal way, is it accessible? We need to ask ourselves all of those questions and all of those assumed truths that we have about the practice of journalism in terms of storytelling. Not the rules so much, right? Not the foundational reasoning about journalism, but the practice of it, right? We need to start to ask ourselves, does it work for this age, right? If we never asked ourselves these questions as journalists, then, you know, all the members of the public would be reading would be the Bible, you know, because it's the Gutenberg press and that's the first, you know, iteration of media freedom and, you know, proliferation of news around the world, right? But we have to continuously question ourselves about the accessibility of our stories, the usefulness of our stories, the worth of our stories, who is and where they are being consumed. I thought these two examples, and I won't play all of them, all of the full video, because I want us to have some time to talk, kind of speak to that. So remember for Iwamboi, she's an alumnus. Is this not like set up like a get ready with me video, right? That's the kind of thing. Am I supposed to say the full get ready with me? I don't know whether that's okay, right? Ah, yeah, so that was 4A, right? Look at the number of views at that time. And then another question, who needs to hear what you have to say? Now, this is really a question about audiences, about access, right? You guys are going into an industry that in many ways is in decline, right? In many ways is in decline, at least the formal structure of it. So here's a story. In 2010, while I was at KTN, I was just about to move to go to the Nation. both the Nation and KTN and the Standard Group had fantastic years. I think the Standard Group at the time had a gross profit of about 610 or 650 million shillings, right? The Nation had well over $1 billion. Blue chip media companies, if ever there were blue chip media companies, right? That was in 2010, not too long ago. But it might be a lifetime away for some of you if you weren't alive when I was graduating from USIU. But it wasn't. I promise you, there'll be a time you'll be like, man, 2024 was just the other day. That time you're in 2050, all right? So it happens, right? Anyway, so 2010 was a very, very important year for these media companies. It was a profitable time. The media was really doing well. We had really got to almost like the pinnacle of that golden era that had been brought about after the liberalization of the media when Mwai Kibaki came into power, right? And then something happened. A few years earlier, Google Ads was launched in about 2007, right? By 2014, at least in the States, ad revenue had now crossed with terrestrial ad revenue from other sources. So internet ad revenue was now making the same, if not more. It's 2014. Here in Kenya, 2014, the Standard Group issues its first profit warning, right? A lot of us are told you can volunteer to retire early, right? 2015, the carnage starts and people start getting chopped. 2016, 2017, 2018, every year, almost every year, I think with the exception of 2019, there were retrenchments in formal media companies, right? The Star was bought by, I think, Times Media, and they tried to shore up revenue. I think a year or two after that, the chop. It's a very scary thing to be in a media company and know that your job is not secure, right? And then COVID happened. And COVID, lots of people lost their jobs, right? And the thing about, the lesson here about the media is that we have to remember that we are constantly under pressure of disruption by anything and anyone that can disseminate information en masse faster than we can, with more credibility or accuracy than we can, or is a tool that is used easily. So we can think of it as being under threat, or you can think of it as us being at that nexus, right? And constantly having to watch for those moments when, there's going to be a change. And like I mentioned, this is one of those moments, right? There is something that's happening. But audience is a really important thing, not just to return to what it is that I was going to say, right? And this example here, I think is the most perfect one. Essentially what he's saying is, we've spoken about the finance bill in English, and now we're going to speak about it in Kikuyu. I'm going to help you to break it down, etc., etc. How many versions of this in your own languages or other languages did you see? Very many, right? Why was this important? This was important because, you see, the news deserts that have occurred as the media has receded are being filled by various things, right? When government, when media, when business recedes from a specific area, nature abhors a vacuum. There are things that are going to enter there. So in some places, it's rumor mongering, it's like very badly produced news. In other areas, it is the control of news and that environment, like what's happening in the Sahel, right? But in other areas, it's TikTok, right? One surprising stat that I didn't know about, and you can check this, is that one of the biggest TikTok channels in Kenya is a Kikuyu news channel. I think it has over 1 million subscribers. So Kikuyu TikTok it's popping. It's properly, it's big, right? And there are people who are on Kikuyu TikTok that will never leave Kikuyu TikTok because they're getting everything that they need, right? So, the lesson here is this. Who is it? Who is your audience? Do you know them? Do you understand them? Are you part of them? Can you speak their language? Can you tell their story? Right? Now, this seems like a new lesson, but fundamentally, these are the same things that our professors have been telling us. Right? Who is your audience? Do you know them? Can you see them when you picture them? Right? I can tell you right now, my kids are not my audience. They hate watching my stuff. Like, why are you watching another documentary? See, you produced it, so you know. Ask them after class, right? But, they have, what's the name of that Ugandan, the Ugandan YouTuber influencer that you guys like watching? Yes, right? So those are the guys that they watch. Raymond Kahuma, sindio? Yeah? And other guys. Chevy as an example. Our younger boys are into tech and phones and stuff, and so like they watch tech influencers. So I recently bought an iPhone. Like, can I boast, right? Just last year, and lo and behold, one of my boys comes and tells me, "By the way, Dad, your phone is trash. Like there's a Samsung that's out there." And then I was like, yeah, this is just like young boy talk. Then he starts rattling off like stats and apps and what have you. And I was like, Kai, did I make a mistake? But the point here is, they are an audience for somebody, and that person is reaching them, right? Before you are, right? And you guys are the ones who've been trained on how to do news, how to report it, which sources to go to, etc. That contest is being won, right? How are you competing? So, I want to wind up here. Let's see if there's anything else. Not really. So that last slide I usually save for other journalism classes. I want to wind up here because I think the point's kind of been made. That you guys are in a moment, right? You know the expression, there's years where nothing happens and then there's weeks where everything happens, right? We're living through one of those periods right now. Just think about the number of things that you've lived through. COVID, right? And all its attendant nonsense that we had a gap year in our lives, right? And then there was an election. And then you guys are living through perhaps one of the first moments when the public consciousness about things to do with the economy is raised to such an extent that they have been protests, at least post June 2024. There was a protest almost every 2 weeks in Kenya, in different parts of the country. It's telling you something, right? There's a raising of consciousness in our country and around the world that we kind of have to now tap into. Tap in, guys, right? Listen, because you guys are the ones who are going to tell these stories, not just tomorrow, today on your TikTok feeds, right? You don't have to wait for a KTN, editor to come in and talk to you about the news the way I did. You're a news creator right now, right? And what you guys have is an advantage that I didn't. You are right now riding the wave of new tech, new platforms, and the usage of things like AI to be able to enhance your storytelling. You can reach audiences in the millions. These are things that I would dream about when I was in university, right? But how are you shaping yourselves to be ready for that moment? Now here's where I go back to the fundamentals. Because there's new technology, because there's new insight, because we are living in the age of AI and etc., it's easy to think that our skills don't matter anymore. But this is when they matter the most. They matter the most now because we have to be professionals in the way we mediate the information that is around us. We have to be the people who give context to our brothers and sisters and the people who we'll never meet on our platforms. How do you do that? You have to learn how to do this, right? Everything else here you can learn. My son and daughter can learn this, right? How to be able to produce an intro, etc. But do they have the context? Do they have the understanding of what is ethical to talk about and what isn't? Because those things still exist, right? But it's tough to see in a post-truth era, which is what we are living through right now. It's very difficult. But if there's ever been a profession who have the tools, the experience, the knowledge to engage in trust building, it's us. It's journalists. Right? You know why? Because the foundation of our profession is the foundation of like the chemical X in the building of society. And so here's my final riddle before we go into question and answer. What are the 4 most popular words in all of storytelling across all time? And there's versions in every language. The 4 most popular words. Yes. Thank you very much. You are the first person in my class has ever answered it on the first try. It either says something about this class, it either says something about the quality of this class, so congratulations, I think that it does, or it says something about the quality of the people I've been teaching, right? Look, once upon a time is a very powerful phrase, it's a very powerful statement. It's the beginning of a journey in storytelling. We think of them as just 4 disparate words put together at the start of a story. But what does once upon a time really do? It transports you to a place, to a time, to a context. Hapo zamani za kale, you know, in Swahili, right? In which languages do we have versions of this? Right? In French. How do you start it in French? Il était une fois. All right? Now I've learned a little more French today. All right? See, you guys are teaching me even without me, right? But the point that I'm making here is this. Even philosophically, right? There's an epistemic power of journalism in that we are mediating context, understanding, right? Information for our public, both backwards and forwards. The same way once upon a time transports you back, a story that you've prepared, an investigative one, or a TikTok story, can transport somebody somewhere, right? The context that you provide in your storytelling, the facts, the evidence, the ethics with which you do it, all of this matters. All of it matters. So even if you are walking into a surface of hot coals, which is what your profession looks like right now, develop the talent of ignoring that and knowing that the destination is far more worthy. I don't know if that's English. It's worthier than the current challenges we face today. Be brave enough to tell those stories. Because if you don't, then there'll be an AI chatbot that does without devoid of the context, devoid of the humanity, devoid of the sources. Or there'll be some TikToker who's got good storytelling skills, but none of the context that you guys are able to develop, who tells that story. Learn the methodology, right? But stay true to the profession. All right? Question time. Asanteni. So if you have questions, it's cool to raise your hands and then we can talk for the next 30 minutes. All right?